Hello, I'm Phil Svitek, 360 Creative Coach, and normally I give lessons for creatives, but in this video, I want to dissect episode 2 of His Dark Materials, which is, if you're unfamiliar, it's a show on HBO. And if you aren't familiar, I want to warn you, this is going to be a spoiler discussion. So if you haven't seen the episode, it's not really worth listening to what I'm about to say. But if you have seen the episode, I'm excited to talk about it. The idea of this video is for me to provide my thoughts, but also to start a discussion because I love this series. And if you watch my first episode, I'm a huge fan of the books, and I'm going to tie in the differences between the book and the adaptation towards the end because there's spoilers for the show, which we're going to talk about, but then obviously if you haven't ever read the books, that's a whole separate spoilery type of discussion, so I'll save that towards the end and give you a forewarning. But nonetheless, I'm a huge fan and have been of the Phillip Pullman books, and so which is why I'm excited for this TV show. So without further ado, here we go. Episode 2, to me, it was quite surprising. I made a prediction last episode after seeing episode 1 that I thought that episode 2 would be primarily about London, and it was. I wasn't wrong about that, but the way in which it did it, I was completely wrong about. One of the biggest things that just took me by surprise was this notion that we're introducing the other worlds very quickly. One of the Magisterium people, he crosses over very quickly into what is now, or what is considered our modern day Oxford. And I was just shocked by this because, the show kind of had made hints at it, but to see it so early up front, I was not expecting that. And secondly, one of the things that happens is it's revealed that Lord Asriel is actually Lyra's real father. Mrs Coulter divulges this information. Now, in the book, this doesn't happen until far down the line, and so I was very surprised by that this happened, but I did like the shift because the way it was a moment of passion and anger that this happened. And one of the things I truly appreciated about this episode, we jam-packed this episode in. Sure, there's Roger dealing with the Gobblers and so forth, and the reveal that Mrs Coulter is really the one behind all of this. But they do still take their time in allowing us to see I don't know if you want to call it a blossoming relationship between Mrs. Coulter and Lyra, but we see that progression. And what starts off as, let's call it love, then kind of gets turned on its head throughout this episode where Lyra learns the deep, dark truth of Mrs. Coulter. And in particular, I love how the Magisterium was handled in this, where they come to Mrs. Coulter and one of the things I talked about last episode was this notion that Phillip Pullman's books are sort of viewed as very against religion. He's an atheist himself, and what I appreciate, I don't think in what this episode manages to do, it's not that it's anti-religion necessarily, it's anti-authority and oppression, because as we're getting to learn about the Magisterium, they just want a sense of control to its ultimate extreme. And we're kind of seeing that even Mrs. Coulter, who is a very strong character and a person within this world, like we haven't seen that much of her, but just in the way people view her and their reactions, she's a very strong person. But as I don't want to call him the henchman, but just for lack of a better term, the henchman tells Mrs. Coulter, no one is above the Magisterium. And so if things need to happen, they will happen. Now, speaking of kind of learning about Mrs. Coulter's dark past, right? The Gobblers, the General Oblation Board. We see, first off, we see her directly interact with Roger, and that's such a powerful moment because she knows ultimately who he's talking about, and obviously she's made this quote unquote promise that she's out looking for Roger, which obviously complete bullshit. But as Lyra, the timing of it is so perfect and so well executed that Roger's writing this letter to her about going north, and Lyra is finding out the dark past, or the dark side of Mrs Coulter through the papers, the secret papers, right? And it's just such an amazing juxtaposition, because while Roger is, in a sense, enthusiastic about going up north, Lyra knows that there's danger. She doesn't quite know what it all fully means, but there's danger, right? And so she has a fear for Roger. And, obviously it's not, and the sad part is, not only is Mrs. Coulter hiding the fact that, like, she's not looking for Roger, and she knows where Roger is, but she doesn't even give Lyra the letter. She just takes all of them and burns it. Now, the other part of it, right? The Gyptians are kind of slowly being integrated into the storyline. They're kind of more in the periphery, but the Ma Costa had this feeling that that Billy, he's just lost and wandering, like he can't possibly have gotten taken by the Gobblers. And in this episode, they do confirm that yes, they in fact were, a lot of the Gyptians were taken by the Gobblers. And so, while we don't see it, you can tell that this is going to set them off on their mission. So overall, and the fact that Lyra learns at least a kernel of all of this truth and is kind of off on her own, I'm excited to see where that goes. Now, she gets, the last thing we see is her about to be abducted. So it'll be interesting to see where that leads to. But I love the cliffhanger ending of that. And overall, I just love the episode. Like, I thought the pacing was really well done. There's a lot of intrigue, especially like just seeing the crossover into quote unquote our world, our Oxford. I was just shocked that they did that this early. That's really cool. Anyway, so now I'm going to kind of get into the spoilery territory squared, meaning now I'm going to tie into the book, because we don't see in the books, we don't cross over until the end. We don't cross over into a new world until the end of this book. Now, the man who's crossed over into Oxford, if you've read The Subtle Knife, and again, if you're listening to this right now, I'm assuming you've read the books, and I'm going to talk it from that perspective. He's the man that eventually Lyra will run into, who steals Lyra's alethiometer in The Subtle Knife, who then is a catalyst for Will Perry to get the Subtle Knife. But it's interesting how they're kind of setting up essentially book 2 already within episode 2 of this season. It's very interesting to me. And the particular thing, Dr. Stanislaus Grumman, we don't, in the first book, The Golden Compass or The Northern Lights, if you're British, we don't learn that Lord Asriel lied until maybe 3/4 into book 1. And here it's basically by him confirmed very early on that Lord Asriel lied to Jordan College in order to get the funding necessary to continue his experiments up north. So the fact that we learn this very early on is very interesting to me, because it seems like they're setting up and getting to the Subtle Knife storyline bits very early, because in the end, Stanislaus Grumman is actually John Perry, the father of Will Perry. My guess would be that we're not going to see Will until season 2, but the fact that they're starting to layer this in still is very interesting to me. The other aspects of it, I was very impressed with how they handled the golden monkey fighting Pantalaimon, because we know touching a demon and kind of roughing up a demon does hurt the person, and so while we were revealed that Mrs Coulter revealed that Lord Asriel is Lyra's real father, there's also that aspect that it hasn't been revealed in the TV series yet, that it's actually Mrs Coulter who's Lyra's mother. But I do like if you do know that fact, I do appreciate that you could see the pain in Mrs Coulter. Like, she wants to be loving, yet she can't. Like, it's a very nuanced performance by Ruth Wilson overall. It's very interesting to watch, so I do appreciate it for aspects of that. Beyond that, obviously there's the general spirit of the books are there, and I appreciate it, but I do like the changes that they're making in this, and especially like with the journalist, like, in the book, there is the journalist who's a catalyst for Lyra finding out some of the truth about Mrs Coulter. But in this sense, we explore that a little bit further because we see what actually happens to the journalist, and the fact that by killing her demon, she dies. And the notion of what the General Oblation Board is doing of severing demons from their humans, it's a very interesting notion that it's been brought up this early, but it's also kind of reinforced, like, that Mrs Coulter has had this process done. So it's interesting how they've kind of planted that, because in the book, this process is quite unsuccessful for the most part, well, at least with kids. And so the fact that Mrs Coulter can separate herself from her demon at vast distances, it's kind of almost like the witches, is a very interesting notion that they're layering in. So overall, I really enjoyed this episode, and I just like the direction of it. I love the changes that they're making, but I love that they're sticking to the spirit of the book, and I think it's doing a fantastic job so far. So I can't wait to see where it goes. Now, obviously, we left on this cliffhanger, but from the books, I imagine this is going to happen in a TV show. I can't imagine it veering that far different, but the Gyptians will save Lyra, and then she joins the Gyptians. We kind of get it in previews where they're out looking for Lyra, and in the books, it's certainly the Gyptians that help hide her and do a really good job of doing that. So I imagine we're going to see a lot of that next episode. But anyway, please let me know your thoughts on episode 2 or just the series in general. I'm a big fan, and I hope you are too. But if not, let me know why you disagree, or if you do agree, or maybe you have just differing opinions. Let me know. I'm very curious. This is a springboard to have a discussion, not just me talking my thoughts. Anyway, I'm at Phil Svitek on social media, and I'll see you next time.